When the 2024 season started, everyone expected Red Bull and Max Verstappen to march away with another championship with little to no resistance from the rest of the field. However, with 16 races done and dusted and 8 to go, both Red Bull and Max are starting to look like underdogs. What is even more surprising, the driver that has put them in this position is Lando Norris. The recently concluded Monza Grand Prix was supposed to be an easy one for the British team, succeeding to have a good qualifying day with both of the drivers on line-up. Starting first, Lando once again lost his pole position in front of his wingman, Oscar Piastri, who does not take care of the British pilot by not making his life easy. The race turned out to be more difficult than expected, due to a tire grinding phenomenon, and lost the first position in front of the Monegasque driver. Comparing with the Dutch GP, where once again Lando qualified on pole but lost the lead at the start. It didn't take him long to regain it, and by the end of the race, he had built up a lead of over 20 seconds. In the last decade, only 2 drivers have managed such feats regularly, Lewis Hamilton and Max. Lando and McLaren haven't just gained equal footing to Max and Red Bull, they are outgunning the defending champs by a considerable degree now. So, how did they conjure up such an uptick in form? Will Lando go all the way and beat Max to the championship? To answer these questions, let's go back to the start of the year. For the first 2 races, Ferrari seemed like Red Bull's closest rivals. McLaren only appeared to have leapfrogged Mercedes to be the 3rd best team on the grid. Both Lando and McLaren had shown flashes of brilliance in the past, but something was different this time around. This first became evident at the 3rd round in Australia. Red Bull had their first poor race of the season. Ferrari were still the best of the rest, but Lando ensured that he picked up his and the team's first podium of the season. What stood out was the fact that he managed to finish nearly 30 seconds ahead of his teammate. The next round at Japan wasn't noteworthy for Lando, but from the following round in China, he stepped up his game to a whole new level. It still wasn't enough to outperform Max, but he had leapfrogged the rest of the field to become a solid contender for the best of the rest spot. This wasn't enough though. There was that final bit missing, and McLaren brought that to the next race in Miami. McLaren had been bringing bits and pieces to the different races as far as upgrades were concerned, but they came with a huge one for the Miami GP weekend. It didn't pay dividends immediately. The sprint qualifying wasn't really good and Lando crashed out of the sprint. The full qualifying wasn't anything to write home about either, but the race proved to be a big turning point. A fortunately timed safety car might have helped him get to the lead, but unlike the last 2 years, Max couldn't just power back to the front. Lando was able to hold off Max and win by more than 7 seconds, which at that time was quite monumental, but the best was yet to come. The Miami GP was followed by a classic in Imola. Max managed to qualify on pole again, but Lando and his teammate Oscar Piastri were very close to Max. The race started off in typical fashion with Max building a healthy lead, but during the last 15 laps, for the first time in a long time, Max looked vulnerable in a car with no damage. Lando was 6 seconds behind Max, but by the final lap, he had reduced the gap to less than a second. It became abundantly clear that had there been a lap or 2 more left in the race, Lando would have picked up his second win that day. One thing was clear, Max was no longer invincible. The true madness came in Austria. Up until now, Max and Lando had been quite cordial. After all, Max was the dominant force and Lando wasn't really a challenger, but Austria would change that. Max took his 8th pole of the season and once again charged into the lead at the Red Bull Ring. As for Lando, he couldn't keep up with Max initially, but he kept the pressure on. This was pressure on a level Max and Red Bull hadn't experienced since 2021, and they cracked. During the second run of pit stops, they had a slow stop. This allowed Norris to get right on the heels of Max, and for the next few laps, Lando tried multiple overtake attempts. Max in turn tried everything within the rules and sometime outside of it to defend. Things came to a head with 8 laps to go as Norris and Max crashed into each other. Norris had to retire from the race while Max limped home in 5th. Even though Max finished well ahead in the final qualifications, this would be a huge turning point for Norris. He proved that he wasn't going to back down from a fight, and McLaren had finally given him a car that could regularly challenge for wins. The next round at Silverstone turned out to be a bit anticlimactic though. Max and Lando settled their differences rather quickly, and the mixed weather conditions that weekend meant that we didn't get a repeat of the heated Battle of Austria. Coming out of the British GP weekend, Max still held a comfortable lead of 84 points over Lando, and Hungary presented McLaren and Norris the first big opportunity to really inflict some damage on this lead. A questionable strategy call from Red Bull and an impatient Max destroying his tyres allowed McLaren to get to the front in the race with no realistic challengers. It was a question of which McLaren driver would take the win. Piastri was in the lead, but an undercut for Norris meant that the latter was in the lead, with a few laps to go. In their infinite wisdom or lack of it, McLaren imposed team orders and asked Lando to relinquish the lead to Piastri, an order he very reluctantly followed. Lando dropped 7 points to Piastri that day, and this might come to haunt him badly. Norris managed to reduce Max's lead by 8 points, but it should have been 15 without McLaren's pesky team orders. Norris got another golden opportunity to inflict more damage in Spa. Max picked up a 10-place grid penalty for exceeding his engine allocation. However, Lando had an off day and he finished behind Max. This was the final race before the summer break, and it looked as if McLaren and Lando had dropped the ball. This perception was shattered at the Dutch GP following Lando's utter domination. That brings us to the present. Lando is still 62 points behind Max and there are 8 more races to go. 3 of these will have sprints. This means that 232 points are still up for grabs. Given Lando's supremacy in Zandvoort and his good shape in Monza, combined with Red Bull's downward spiral, it is entirely plausible that Lando can win the remaining 8 races. If Max manages to finish second in all these races, Lando would still be behind by 7 points, the exact number of points that he was forced to leave on the table in Hungary. However, if Lando also grabs a few points for fastest laps and generally finishes ahead in the 3 remaining sprints, he can dethrone Max. In essence, Lando needs the perfect run in the remaining 8 races, while all Max must do is finish second on his bad days and finish in a couple of races ahead of Lando to narrowly defend his title. If Lando loses out by 7 points or less, it will be a bitter pill to swallow. The good news for them is that they are still on an upward trajectory and Red Bull are yet to find a solution for their poor form. McLaren will also bring more upgrades in the remaining races which can further strengthen their position as the best team in F1. Oscar Piastri is doing a far better job as a wingman to Lando than Sergio Perez is doing for Max. If Piastri can manage to finish ahead of Max while protecting Lando in just a few races, the championship won't be as closely contested. There are still a lot of ifs and buts and plenty of possibilities, but this is now Lando's and McLaren's championship to lose. The cool thing about F1, especially this year, has been the unpredictability. 7 different drivers have already won a race this year and more could join them. McLaren could hit a plateau, or Red Bull could regain their form. A lot could happen over the remaining 8 race weekends, but one thing is for sure, it will be one exciting championship battle and all we can do is buckle in and enjoy the show. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting discussions about the fascinating world of motorsport. Until next time, stay with us and keep exploring the adrenaline rush of racing.